This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
All right, so everyone's here. I will open this meeting on the City Council Finance Committee side. I'm the acting chair since Dan unfortunately is unable to join us tonight.
You need it.
And I will go ahead and open this for the school committee finance chair as well.
Great. So, hi everybody. Thanks for being here. I know that this was a bit of a scheduling. It was a little tough on scheduling. So on this side we've got, for my agenda, there's mayor's communication. The mayor's not here. Public speak, but there's no one from the public here. So the first item on our agenda is the discussion of the FY23 budget and request. And is that where we were going to discuss, sorry, I'm kind of playing catch up on a little bit of this.
Yeah.
Is that where we're going to discuss the questions that we had from over the course of the last few weeks?
Yeah.
Why don't we do that now? I think that's what this is supposed to be. Alison, you were able to get...
Yes, we received questions from Councilor Rist and from you, Tom, and from Connie just sent us some comments and wasn't sure whether it should be here, but we've got some answers. So Nick has some responses to the questions. I'll let Nick kind of take the lead, but of course if more questions come up, just we jump in.
Just for the record, I know the councilor sent some question through email for the public. Can you or someone can read it?
Read them,
so
yeah.
that way the public will
And
know
we did
what
not
those
share
questions.
any responses.
No, I
if
know you're
anyone-
saying that. I
right.
just like for the public
Yes.
to know which
Yes.
what the councilor
Okay.
was.
So I don't know if you want to, we received the questions from Councilor Rist first. If you want, I'm happy to read them.
Cool, let's start with those.
Okay, sure. And
Well,
these are
can I just make a recommendation so that it's, I think might be a little bit cleaner and clearer, is that if Nick's going to be answering this, Nick can just start by reading the question that he's then going to answer. Then he answers that question, and then we read the next question. Instead of just reading out a bunch of questions, I think it's going to be better to list them with the answers along with them.
Sure.
So that would be my recommendation on how to proceed.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I just want to give the caveat that I typed up some notes in terms of answering the questions, and I did redact the questions a little bit in my notes. So what I'm going to be reading is not verbatim.
Sure.
What the whole, because some of the questions, were connected to other sentences that weren't really necessary for me to make my notes, if that makes sense.
Totally.
So maybe, I don't know if that would be acceptable or if somebody would actually like to read the full question before I answer it.
Nick, are you suggesting that some people on this committee are not concise in the way that they write?
No, never at all.
I'm the worst about that. Just whatever works for you. I mean,
He's the new guy, Tom. He doesn't know that you're kidding.
As long as we get the content, I think it's fine.
And I think it's, it may open up a follow-up question that someone might have,
Sure.
so.
All right, well,
By ear.
I'll begin with Councilor Rist's questions because those were the first ones I received. The first question was, he was inquiring about the primary reasons for the budget increases from year to year. He mentioned that, and this is playing on the document that Dr. Leclerc shared, that salary increases overall, factor in 3 to 4% of an increase from year to year. He mentioned that it's primarily due to the collective bargaining agreement, or that's what he assumed. He asked when the collective bargaining agreement expires. He mentioned that Mountain View has a major increase, and then followed up with asking if Mountain View's operating expenses spreadsheet includes staffing additions due to the use of grants. My response to that would be that teacher salary increases are certainly a result of the collective bargaining agreement. You'll see, from year to year, really two types of salary increases. One would be a result of a cost of living adjustment from year to year. You may frequently hear people say that, we're getting 2% this year, 2% next year, and, what that is that's their cost of living adjustment. However, there, sometimes educators move up steps as well, depending upon if they've gotten enough credits to move from one step to the next, or they've had enough years of service within the district to move up, or sometimes they move over on the salary scale, what we would refer to as a lane change, because they went from a bachelor's degree to a master's degree, or master's to master's plus 30. So when you throw all that in a blender, that's where you would get the 3 to 4% from year to year. It's, often you only hear about the cost of living adjustment, the 2% that's in the current CBA. So one might wonder why the overall increase is higher than that. And the result is because people advance in steps or change lanes. Our current CBA expires on June 30th of 2024. So next year at this time, we'll be thinking about negotiating for the next CBA. So we have one more year of the current one. In each of the 3 years that our current CBA covers, a 2% cost of living adjustment increase, it was agreed to. So next year, the entire salary scale, all the amounts on it would increase by 2%. And I already mentioned that, many teachers move up steps or change lanes. So that's really what factors into the increase in salaries. Getting to the Mountain View School portion of Councilor Rist's first question, the Mountain View operating budget spreadsheet does not include any grant-funded staff in it at all. So everything on that sheet that is being presented right now, those are all expenses and salaries that are part of the local school committee appropriation. None of the cost center spreadsheets include any of the grant-funded staff. So that's my response to the first question. I don't know if anybody has any follow-up question based on what I said, or if you want me to just move on to number 2.
Can I just, and Omar, I don't know, can the people on the screen doing remote, can they see your screen that you have up there?
Yep.
Okay, so okay, so about midway down, I think you were referencing, I can't tell what line that is that number 10? 9, 10? Number 9. the difference in number 9. So remember, there's no previous year data because Mountain View School is new, so we combined all these schools and put them together, but there is an increase in that line. I think it's 14.99, or it's 14 point something, and that was due to the fact that we took some positions that were in the district budget and central office budget, because they were shared amongst elementary buildings. Like if Omar was a school psychologist and worked between Center and Pepin, we kept it at central office in our budget. But then when we moved into the new school, we put all those people were only going to be in one cost location now, so we moved them out of the central office budget and moved them into the school budget because they were no longer shared among different elementary schools. So you see an increase there, but there's probably a decrease in another cost center, whether in special ed or central office. It was one of those areas.
I see the line right above has a decrease, but
Is it
Yeah,
similar?
it's like teacher professional services.
Yeah, and it could be that, yeah. So we just did a better job of accounting for where positions needed to be.
okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, hey.
Yeah, Hadel has her hand up.
Sure, Hadel, go ahead.
Thank you. So for understanding purposes, when would you guys know that a teacher is earned an additional degree or have a license in hand and that person is going to move? Do we know it during when you guys are preparing the budget, or it comes as they come back in September or October and they say, here's my certification and I'm going to move up and puts in the request? How does that work?
We would know that when we are planning the budget for the following year, because we allow teachers to notify us of when they're going to have a degree change. If you're studying, obviously you know, like, oh, I've got one more course, I've got 2 more courses. You know your anticipated graduation date is in May. So you provide that information to us by January 1st of that calendar year, so that we know that the following September, the following school year, we have to increase your salary. The unknowns are people that join the district over the summer. You know, someone leaves and they might leave as a bachelor's step 13 or whatever, but then over the summer we have to hire someone and they might come in at a master's step 6. So that's where you come up with fluctuations in the salary bottom line.
So let's say one of the teacher leaves with bachelor's and another one is hired as a master's. We did budget. You must budget assuming that this teacher is not going to leave. So let's say somebody is having $50,000 as a salary. The new teacher has been hired for $60,000. There's only $10,000 you are in deficit for that position in new fiscal year.
That's
Am I correct?
You're correct.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
If I can just add something there, I think that's important though, is remember we have, I'm not gonna get the number correct here, but roughly 200 plus staff members here. And so it's not just like one position changes and suddenly we're in a deficit. We also have people who have a master's and retire and suddenly we're hiring somebody with a BA. So there's a lot of fluctuation that can happen in there that to a degree balances itself out. And that's part of managing the budget and keeping on track of it throughout the entire year.
But
So, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Hadel.
So, does that mean that somebody keeps track of all the contracts and if, like, hire and, what do you call it? Not hiring and firing, but hiring and
The
coming
separation.
on.
Yes.
Separation, thank you.
Yes.
Separation, so there is a list.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Yep.
I keep records of all that, and Sue Colby also keeps records of all that. I present a personnel report to the school committee every month that shows the new hires and transfers and separations. And one thing I did in my prior district that I will do here as well when the time comes is I keep what I call a staff turnover spreadsheet that helps me, really with the financial aspect of who comes and goes. So basically, that's how you figure out where you are in terms of, the unknowns. 3 people left, 3 new people got hired, most of which happens in the summer. But you just put in one column what the person who left salary was, and then in the next column what the new person's salary is, and you see if it's more or less, and that's how you manage it.
So
Yeah.
just so I can kind of see the big picture, just to kind of what you all are dealing with. Like, I recognize there's a lot of fluctuation, and you just gave an example of 3 left, 3 came in. Is that like roughly the range of how many people kind of come and go over the course of the year? Is it like as many as 50 people? Is it as many? I know it can be very kind of fluid, etc. But
We probably had how many did we have this summer? We probably had 30 new teachers come into the district this summer, 25, 30 new professional staff, and then para-educators come and go like water. We probably had 15 since September, you know. So it's constantly adjusted.
Yeah, so that's very helpful. So with the 30 that were new kind of professional hires, that means you had 30 people who left in the last year?
Retired, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So just a final comment, because I want to make sure we're clear. When we begin the budget building process in the winter, spring, one of the exercises that the business manager will take is he will take every single employee in the district and move them over to what their projected salary is going to be next year. So he will take into account, I know this person is getting a degree, they've been highlighted, so this person's moving over one column, this person's moving over one column, plus down one step, this person's staying on this step, but only getting a 2%. All that is calculated in our budget development process, so that our payroll line is pretty close, except for the turnover in new positions. But all that's factored in.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions on this, or any more follow-up on this question from Dan, or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, can I just add one thing?
Sure.
You know, something to it when, I'm actually going to be starting the work Dr. LeClaire just mentioned next week, believe it or not. It's already time to start doing that. But folks that we know who are retiring, you know, sometimes it can be difficult to, you know, factor in what their, you know, replacement's going to make. So what we do is look at the type of position it is. You know, if you have somebody retiring who, you know, maybe is a world language teacher and is harder to find, you would budget a projected salary higher up on the pay scale for that. However, if you're budgeting for maybe a third grade classroom teacher where there's, you know, likely quite a few coming out of colleges, you would budget something lower on the salary scale for that. Are you going to get it exactly right? No, because there's too much unknown there. But, you know, when we present, you know, the budget to the committee in March, it will be as close as possible to, you know, it will be as accurate as it can be at that time.
Great. All right, so how about we move on to question 2? Because that was just one
We'll be here all
question.
night.
We could be here a while, and I'm not going to lie, I was up watching those election results, so I'm a little bit sleepy.
He kind of already answered number 2, and when he made a comment.
Yeah.
Grants are
Yeah,
not
number
on.
2 just involved, you know, is anything grant funded in those spreadsheets that were shared?
This is city district funding.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess,
No other funding sources are there, not grants, not revolving funds, not,
We
you know,
present
nothing.
to our school committee what our grants are used for, but it's not part of what city council is approving or the mayor is approving for a budget.
that is true. I would be interested in seeing it if you had it, though, just because it would, I think, help us to get a more holistic view of what goes on there, and just what's the sort of flow is in terms of how stable is it, that sort of
I
thing.
think it should be a separate, grants should be a separate night. There should be a night of their own.
Yeah, that's great. We
Because
can do
they have
that.
they have different calendar years that they operate under, and
Oh, yeah, 100%. All
Yeah.
my point is just that
Yeah.
I would be interested in learning
Yeah,
more about
absolutely.
that, but yeah, it doesn't have to be tonight. So he had a question about transportation.
Yeah, the third question was about transportation. He asked, is the 2-mile rule creating new busing needs, or are there other factors in play? Really, the major factor here is the consolidation of the 3 elementary schools into 1. What this did was add 5 buses to our contract. because not nearly as many students can walk to school as could in the past. I mean, your elementary schools are very centrally located. You had a lot more foot and bicycle traffic, going to those schools. Mountain View, not situated as close to population centers necessarily. So 5 buses needed to be added to our contract. Another factor is special ed transportation, though. There was an increase in students who are placed in out-of-district settings, which then leads to an increase in special ed transportation costs. When we have a student that is placed in a private out-of-district school, we have to pay the transportation cost to go to that school as well. And sometimes they can be pretty far away. I mean, they're not all very close. So, we contract with a vendor to do that, but those routes can be quite pricey. So, those 2 factors are the reason for the increase in transportation costs.
Could I ask a follow-up question on that one?
Sure.
When it comes to, you're saying that there's an increase in the number of students that are being placed in these out-of-district things. Is that just something that fluctuates from year to year, or is there sort of like any sort of systemic reason why there's an increase in the number of out-of-district placements?
I think the answer is that it definitely fluctuates year to year. I think the pandemic has demonstrated that we have students that are coming out of the pandemic that have had some significant traumatizing experiences being at home and not exposed to the world, and they've required some supports that our regular school district could not handle. And then the other factor that comes into play is we have a community within Easthampton that takes on a lot of foster children. And sometimes foster children come with DCF placements already assigned to them. And we are mandated by law to continue to have kids go to those placements, no matter where they are.
Oh, that's super interesting. Okay.
Yes.
I was interested.
And so those are sometimes unknowns to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're doing stuff like, I guess the bigger question, and this might actually mean that you don't have to deal with one of my questions later, because is it the feeling of the schools that, and it sounds like what you were saying is that in many cases, yes, that with the particular needs that these students have, they're not things that the district is necessarily set up to provide. In other words, when a kid ends up being, finds themselves in one of these situations, it's not like a kid choicing out, you're like, oh darn, it is sort of like, okay, there's like a legitimate need that we're not necessarily configured to provide.
Right, and we don't have the staffing.
I'm definitely going to touch upon that in the answer, Councilor Peak, to your question about the 14% increase in those tuitions.
Okay, great. It sounds like we just sort of resolved that one, but yeah, we can definitely come back to that. Does anyone else have anything else on that one, or should we keep moving?
I just want to make sure I understood the DCF piece. So if I understood correctly, what you're saying is that there's a foster child in Easthampton now, but they came from Chicopee. They also come with that transportation need, so they have to be bused to Chicopee. Is that my understanding?
That is one scenario, yes. That would be a simple scenario. But a more complex scenario would be the child is in DCF placement and they are in a substantially separate program, a private tuition-based school that when they come into foster care into a home in Easthampton, we have to take on the cost of that private school tuition now, and the transportation associated with that, which could be in Worcester, Mass. It could be a special ed program in Greenfield. It could be anywhere.
And the other thing that Dr. LeClaire, you did a great job explaining, but I think you didn't state is that you could get a foster kid right in the middle of the year, and then you have to start that cost. So it's not something that you, like, if you knew about it in August, you might be able to make some adjustments, but you might get that child in November or January or February, and then you have that same cost that you just have to pick up immediately.
Okay, so then, so the city of Easthampton is now covering the cost of this. Is this something that the state then reimburses the city for, or is this something that comes out of?
Well, I'm going to touch upon that.
It's called circuit breaker, yep.
Yeah, we're gonna go.
Okay, got it, okay.
Yeah.
It does reimburse us for a portion.
Okay.
And sometimes DCF will split the cost of a placement if a child is in, you know, a highly specialized, like a residential placement or something. You know, DCF will sometimes, depending on the situation, pay a portion of the tuition, but we would want the rest.
Okay. That's very helpful. These words have been thrown around and I don't quite understand what is the scenario that we're talking about, right? And so that's very helpful, so I appreciate you saying that.
Sure.
Of course.
Hadel, I see your hand. And by the way, people, if we could just, I mean, I understand we're getting excited here and it's fine, but to the extent that we could raise hands, it would probably make this, like, there's a little bit of crosstalk, but I think it's fine. But Hadel.
Thank you. Question is, how often we get new students, like average? Is it like 1 or 10? Average. I'm not asking for an exact amount every fiscal year, but how many students we anticipate? And so is it like we're gonna get, or it just every year it varies?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say every year it varies. I mean, you know, I don't have a lot of historical context within Easthampton, but, you know, in my work in Northampton and also in my work as a former principal, I can say it definitely varies from year to year. You know, when you build your budget, the first thing you do when you're looking at your out-of-district tuition costs is have a meeting with your special ed director and you know, you figure out who's graduating first of all, because, you know, that tuition would then come off. But also you look at potential students that you know of in district that may end up in an out-of-district placement. So you want to factor in for that. But beyond that, I mean, I would think maybe an average of, I don't know, Dr. LeClaire, 1 to 2 a year if I really had to average it.
Oh, at least. I think
I
that's
mean,
very conservative.
In some years you could have none, but some you could have 4. It just, it's really an unknown.
So when you guys do the budget, do you do an estimate? Like, do you put an assumption? Because it's all estimate at the end of the day with budget. So do you put like a cushion, like, okay, let's say it's gonna cost us $10,000, right? I know, I don't have the actual numbers. I'm just imaginary numbers I'm picking up. So it's gonna cost us $10,000. We are going to have, let's say $6,000 will be covered through other funding sources. We will be short by $4,000. So that $4,000, you guys, like, you know, you guys put it an adjustment somehow, or do you put it an assumption like we're gonna put this as a cushion in the budget for possible unforeseen situation?
No.
Is there practice like that?
No, and I think that a correction I would make, Hadel, is we don't put estimates really in our budget when it has to do with concrete things. So for the students that we have in specialized programs outside of the district, we know what the cost increase is going to be in the tuition for the following year. We get a letter from that school that says next year the cost of tuition will increase to this. So it's not, we don't fudge our budget. We put the concrete numbers in our budget for the concrete students that we have. We don't put money as a placeholder, like, let's pad this $50,000 in case someone decides they need to go to an outside placement. Our budget is we deal in concrete numbers.
Okay.
If we have a student that comes in after the budget is set, that is what we use our school choice revolving funds for. And that's why we have a conversation every single year with city council and the mayor. We can't put that down to zero because we can't be in a situation where we would have to come to the city council in November and say, a new student moved into the community that is requiring an out-of-district placement and will cost $200,000. That would give too much information away about a student whose privacy needs to be protected. So
Absolutely.
we deal with concrete numbers for the concrete students that we have.
That was my second question. If you don't have cushion, then how do you meet at the end of the fiscal year the expenses? So you answered that question. Thank you.
Yeah, it's school choice or circuit breaker. That's what it
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
is. All right, should I go on to question 4 now?
I'm fine with that.
Okay, question 4 read, the PowerPoint FY23 presentation shows some staff reductions and many grant-funded positions. What happens when the grants run out? ESSER funds are a primary source. Again, what happens when the grants run out? I assume these positions are entitled to benefits. Do the grants pay for those benefits? Which I believe, Councilor Peak, this will touch upon a question you asked as well.
Yeah, I was redundant on this one.
Yeah, well, you couldn't have known that though. They weren't shared with anybody other than, and not only that, but it's a huge question considering the amount of salary we have in ESSER. So my response to that would be some positions that are grant funded are sustainable from year to year, depending upon which grant funds them. An example of this would be positions funded by our Title I grant and our Special Ed 240 grant. Those are grants we get every year. The amounts may vary slightly from year to year, but we know we will receive those grants. Other grants, such as the ESSER grant, those are a different story. The ESSER funding will run out at the end of FY24. The positions that are currently funded with ESSER dollars are budgeted as such through FY24, as well as for this current school year. So if you looked at that, and that PowerPoint is in the documents that Councilor Rist shared, right?
Yes.
So you would get a little bit of explanation about, what came out of which grant on one of the slides in there. But when you look at that and you see the like 1.4 something million dollar figure with ESSER, that number is for 2 years. That's not just this year. That's this year and next year. That's like the entire grant amount for the 2 years of salary. So knowing that that's going to dry up, it's important for the school department to prioritize which positions are necessary to keep and really to absorb into the local budget. The purpose of the ESSER grants was primarily to help students and schools recover from the impacts of COVID-19, both academic and social emotional. Theoretically, these impacts will not last forever. I mean, you're always going to have students who have needs, but at some point in the future, though we may not know when and at this time, the impact that COVID had on students' education won't be there anymore. Using a collaborative process that is, both data-driven and aligned to the district's strategic plan, we can determine where our students are and what their needs will be going forward as we make decisions about staffing resources that will be necessary for us to meet our goals and our students' needs. So, really the short answer is that there's going to have to be a collaborative process where we prioritize what's necessary to keep by absorbing into the local budget, really through reallocation. When you go through your budget building process each year, you look at enrollment, you look at, if you need to absorb or add a position, is there something that you no longer need? So you're not just adding a bunch of positions to a budget. You're really trying to reallocate money you already have to fund the positions you now need, because what you needed 10 years ago might not be what you need next year. And then, to answer the question about the benefits, these positions are certainly entitled to benefits, but the only benefit that the grant covers is 9% to the Mass Teachers Retirement System. So when we write a grant and there's salary in it, 9% of all that salary automatically gets chopped off the grant total. The city never sees the revenue. It goes directly to MTRS. We still have to count it as revenue,
Right.
because then it would look like the award was less than it was, but we never see it.
So would that then mean that like health and dental and whatnot, those are being paid?
Absorbed by the city.
Yes, okay. Councilor Denham.
This is actually kind of related to my question around I know it was a very general question of like your philosophy of what are you trying to accomplish? What are you thinking about? What is your approach to kind of addressing all of these issues, right? So if I understand now, the ESSER grants, because I was trying to understand, okay, we've got this chunk of money, it's supposed to help something, but then the money's going away. So why wouldn't our budget go back to what it was in terms of thinking, how do we kind of support students, et cetera? So if I understand, these grants are to provide additional resources to students either through counseling, mental health support, smaller classes, et cetera. Is that my understanding? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
I would say so.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so that's very clear. Because I'm actually at this conference right now, and one of the things that we were talking, it was about higher education, but they're talking about the impact of COVID having a lasting impact up to the class of 2032, right? So now that's college students, but that might be a third grader who right now, right? And so that's going to have a lasting impact. And so we're not out of this yet, right? And so if I understand, also, you are wanting to split this up over 2 years, and so the philosophy or the goal that you're trying to accomplish is to spread some of these resources out over a couple of years. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, we were trying to be fiscally responsible and not spend the money all in one shot.
Right, so the idea is to spread the resources that students can access out over an additional 2 years until the state says, okay, well, gee, we have more issues with education and now we need to provide more funding.
Yes.
And that would hopefully get us to filling a gap of some kind.
Yes.
Okay. That's very helpful, thank you. I understand that better now.
And actually taking a look at this, I think some of these positions, when I looked over it the first time, without understanding the context, some of these words didn't mean a whole lot, but looking at it now, like social emotional learning coordinator, it's like, yeah, okay, you could see why you'd need extra help there right now, but ideally, a couple years out, kids are maybe a bit more, have had some time to adjust a little bit, and maybe you don't necessarily, it'd probably still be nice to have that person because the world is traumatic in ways other than a pandemic, but
so when I come to you asking for that in a few years,
we can have that conversation. But I think I'm getting this now that these are really, for the most part, I see like there's a K-8 STEM teacher, you're probably always going to want K-8 STEM teachers, but for the most part, these are people who are being brought in to specifically help handle the social and emotional and educational impact.
And shore up academic, deficits that children experienced over the pandemic.
But that hopefully, by the time the ESSER funds run out, a lot of that work has been done to remedy a lot of that.
Yes.
And
a STEM teacher is science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. So it's an additional teacher that can help support some of those extremely important content areas.
Right. Yeah, I just think that from the side of when we're talking about this in
Yeah.
the city, I think there, when I first saw this slide, in finance committee, my first reaction is to be like, so in 2 years, is the budget going to go up by, so it's 1.4 million, so it's $700,000 because
From your ears, yes. From your mouth.
like,
That would be nice, yes.
But that, because like if we retained all of these people,
Yes.
that would be
Yes.
what we would potentially have
Yes.
to do.
The other piece is that we have not had a growth budget in a few years.
Mm-hmm.
We have not added positions, and to remain competitive to other communities that also have school choice, we need to add staff sometimes. And if there's no opportunity to do that in a city budget, then we look at grants to help us start to get things going and hope that we can find a way to find more grants to either keep them going or have a district that eventually picks it up.
Right. And I think that, frankly, with Prop 2.5, I think that is the case for a lot of departments.
Yeah.
It's hard to do too much
Exactly.
growth with Prop 2.5.
Yeah,
And actually, I want to come back to that. Once we're done with these questions, I want to add one extra question because question 1 passed, and I'm curious what you think the fiscal ramifications of that are going to be. But we should keep going with this for now.
All right, so I'll take that as my cue to move on to number 5.
Let's do it.
Councilor Rist was under the impression that, like the city, the schools have a reserve account, but he said he couldn't find it on the spreadsheet. So he asked if it did in fact exist, and if so, how much do we have in the reserve and what is it protecting against? So we do have, what some may call a reserve account. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to shut the door of the room I'm in because one of my dogs is squeaking a toy, and I don't need you to hear that.
I'm very much of the Zoom policy that like dogs and cats and kids are always welcome.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Like eventually she would have come in here and done that, and as cute as she is, not going to help us move this along. So, we do have our school choice account, which some people may refer to as our reserves. I guess that's what it would be, for lack of a better term. It's used to offset our local budget, as well as to fund unexpected expenses, like we mentioned earlier, such as increases in out-of-district tuition, or if a student ends up being placed in a setting that we didn't anticipate. Or sometimes a family just moves into town and their child is already placed somewhere. Those kinds of things definitely happen. In FY23, $675,000 of school choice funding is budgeted to offset teacher salary. An additional $325,000 is budgeted to offset the increased transportation costs. So a total of $1 million, which was higher than anything Dale had ever budgeted before out of school choice. If the school department does not receive an additional appropriation, the shortfall is going to have to come out of there, or at least most of it. Further school choice funds would be needed to offset that deficit, created by the $561,000 cut. So basically what this would do is leave less money available to offset the FY24 local budget, as well as less for us to fund unanticipated expenses that may come up. Our school choice account is not listed in those local budget Excel sheets that were shared with you. But at the beginning of FY23, there was $1,586,642 in the school choice account. So then the $1 million is budgeted to offset the appropriation this year. We anticipate receiving $747,620 in school choice revenue this year. That's based on, basically the students that, are choiced into our district. Is that an exact figure? No. The state usually, they'll make a correction sometime next June Usually it's in our favor if that means anything to you. We end up with a little bit more. It's important to note that $693,128 in school choice funds beyond what were budgeted last year was used to cover the shortfall at the end of the year. So this made a total of $1,368,128 in school choice funds that were expended last year. Only $675 were budgeted, so we spent an awful lot more than anticipated last year. So as you can see, that level of funding does not match the revenue that we get annually and is thus not sustainable.
Right.
I don't see the school choice revenue going much higher than what we would get this year. I'm talking over time, just because, we're kind of limited in the amount of slots we can open. The school committee has committed itself to having reasonable class sizes. And while a new building certainly would be lucrative for people to want to school choice their students here, there's only so many slots we can open.
We're full.
Yeah, we're full. That's pretty much there's no room at the end. And we get $5,000 in revenue per student that is choiced here, plus an additional what's referred to as a special ed increment. If any of those students require special services that come with additional costs, and that's all calculated by the state, really. So for some students we may get $25,000, but your base rate is $5,000, and it's been that way since I don't know. I was probably in college when they said that, so that has not risen with inflation.
And if I could just add just two quick comments. We've been talking theoretically a lot tonight about students that come into our community that are being placed out in special ed settings. But we also have sometimes students move into the community that has an IEP that they bring with them, an individualized education plan. They're a special needs student. They come into the community, and that might say in writing, this child requires a 1-to-1 aid. We haven't budgeted for that. And to Hadel's point, we didn't pad our budget for that. So where do we come up with the payment for that person? We don't come to you and ask for it. We take it out of school choice. So when that comes into our district, we're required to abide by that. And I also want to point out to the committee, because you might be thinking, well, then why do you take those students for school choice? You have to accept school choice students blindly. So I cannot discriminate. If I see an application for school choice, I just know that it's an application for a first grade slot. I can't say, well, I'll take this child because they don't require any special services.
Or what I want.
Nor would you want me to. So it's an unknown what I get.
Sure.
So, but that's where school choice revolving funds go. We don't pad our budget that but we also don't come back to you for an appropriation when we need money for staffing.
Councilor Dunn.
So just in response to that, I think that's reasonable and great, and maybe I should know this answer. Is Easthampton known for something in particular that it provides students, and so parents outside of Easthampton are looking to get students into Easthampton? And is that something that we should be aware of in order to be able to budget accordingly for those instances?
We are a great school system, and people want to
I believe
come
that.
here.
I believe that.
We have brand new schools. I mean, we are attractive. Compared to our neighbors, we're pretty much fully staffed. We have great buildings. To answer a question that's going to come later on, we have developed several substantially separate programs for students with special needs in our schools.
Okay, yeah.
So that makes us attractive. We have small class sizes. There are a lot of reasons why we're an attractive school district. But that's the rub.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on this point? Hadel.
For my understanding purposes, like if we have a city department, so city side, we give X amount as an estimated budget because there is no actual, and practically I don't see everything being so transparent and down to penny actual. We do the best practices, not like cushion money into every department's budget, but we do a close estimate onto any of the budgets. At the end of the fiscal year, whatever is not spent closes to general fund. I see school doesn't do that. School uses every single penny out of the budget, and whatever the portion needs to be covered additionally, you guys use school choice money. However, the city side goes for appropriation because they don't have other way to support the department. Like auditor department don't have a grant which we can support. If we need money, we go to city council. So how does that mechanism work when X amount of number is given to you, as a school budget, and there's nothing going to general fund, but yet school choice has a balance, a huge balance, because if you're getting, I don't have the exact numbers, but like 800,000 as a revenue for school choice in a fiscal year, you estimated that your expenses are going to be $600,000. So you still, at the end, it should be $200,000 should be the balance, not somewhere in millions. So how does that work?
Well, the expenses for this year are $1 million. They're not 600,000. So, we're technically spending more than the revenue that's coming in.
No. What I was saying, yes, it was $1 million, but you estimated 600, right? Is that?
No, are you talking about last year or this year?
Last year, 22, because I can't talk to 23 as I don't have the full year, and I can't see the revenue projection for this year. So I'm just trying to understand how the budget works, and if there really is a need to make it work as a best practices, even hearing that, oh, we will be needing this grant money can go tomorrow. I don't want city to have a huge deficit in the school department and we have to come up instantly. I'd rather have like slowly build the budget in, so we are not saying like, oh, we need $5 million all of a sudden, and we have to struggle with that money, versus in next 5 years, we will need 5 million. Let's start now with X amount, and we'll meet somewhere closer in the budget financially. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, I don't want to see finances to be like, next year I will need 5 million. Well, if you knew from last 2 years or 3 years, unknowns are always there. Why don't we have a best practice in place now, so we don't struggle 5 years from now? Does that make sense? And that's what I'm trying to understand, like, how does that work?
I'm
trying to understand.
Yeah, well, I don't have a lot of historical knowledge either, being new in my chair here. I mean, what I can tell you is that, when you build a budget, you look at the funding sources that you believe are going to be available, and you don't add a bunch of things on top of that. You stay within what you believe you're going to be able to fund, and budgeting some money from school choice to go against salary is something that probably most districts do, because they know that they need more than their municipality may be able to give them in a given year. Where you run into trouble is when you have a ton of unexpected expenses on top of that, because over time what's left in your school choice account is going to shrink, and if you're constantly spending more than you're taking in, you're going to hit a cliff. I can speak from my prior district, who is going to hit a gigantic one at the end of this year in terms of their school choice. And, you know, I do not want to put the city of Easthampton or the school department in that position ever.
So.
If I could just add a specific to that too, I think that there's always a challenge when we look out to future years. But for an example to what you're speaking to, right, for us to be able to plan ahead, I think this year is a great example of that. We all knew that we were going to have an increase in transportation costs. We knew that by consolidating to a single school, everybody involved knew that there was going to be an increase in that cost. We didn't have a dollar amount to it. We didn't know how many buses it was going to cost. We had to wait till we got here to know the exact dollar amount. But we all knew that. Everyone who was involved with, you know, promoting the new school, we talked, it's in our slideshows to the community. So we knew there were these increased costs that were coming. We talked about that, we put it forward, and as soon as we had a dollar figure to it, we put that dollar figure to it. And unfortunately, that wasn't recognized or supported, and that's why we're in the situation right now where we're still talking about $500,000 unfunded to our school budget, right? So yes, of course we want to plan out 5 years and have the good conversations with the city and the city council and make sure everyone's on the same page with that. And we've tried to do that. And we're at a point right now where we did all the things we could to get in to have those good conversations, and it still fell flat. And we're still struggling now with a budget that's, you know, not set up correctly. So I just want to just a little bit of a rub on that too, right?
So do you guys get contract? Like, is it a written contract with, is there, sorry, I am trying to
A
understand.
contract for the transportation?
For transportation.
The transportation had a contract. It was set up for 3 years and for a certain number of buses. We knew when we were going to get
we built that
in the
into
new
our
school.
budget.
Yeah.
Okay. Who is the custodian of that contract?
We are. The school district. The school district?
The school district?
Yes.
Is it like a public information? Can I ask for that contract, or how does that's gonna be? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's in my office if you want it.
Oh, okay. I'll come see you for that. Okay.
Yeah, so I would just say, just to be on the record, and I think everyone on this call knows, we've put forward a level service budget every single year. Level service meaning the same services offered next year that we offered this year. That's not the same as a level budget. A level budget is the same exact dollar amount as you had to work with this year. A level service budget takes into account that costs go up for salaries, transportation, utilities. We put forward a level service budget. This is my 5th year here. I've never received a level service budget. So we do attempt to plan for the future year. We've never received it yet, but we'll keep trying.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we've all, every department probably could say the same thing, so we're not unique.
Last 3 years, nobody got the rate. Everybody, we crunched the numbers last 3 years.
So, I mean, we put forward our needs.
Mm-hmm.
I think, well, Megan, you had a question.
Yeah, I wanted to just say, in this level services budget was like the key thing that the community was super invested in. So this, I mean, I think this is like the point to keep coming back to. We cannot have our school district go backwards in terms of services provided. Yeah. Level services is a minimum goal, right? Like growing our services is really the goal for the children in the community. And this is why there were parents who were so fired up and there was like, this is what the crux of the thing was. So I just wanted to highlight that we really have to be thinking not just about level services, about growing services. What else do these kids need?
Yeah.
If there's more that's needed.
So I feel like I'm picking up on there is a conversation, something Hadel said and something Dr. LeClaire said about sort of that I think actually something this committee is going to need to discuss, but maybe tonight isn't the best time because I think it's like probably a very big discussion in of itself about sort of, but it's easily teed off by Councilor Rist's question about sort of like, you know, is like about what are the best practices around the school sort of keeping its own reserves versus just asking for like a different sized budget that then within the understanding that if there's money left over, it reverts back to free cash, which I think is, from my understanding, is some people in the city, that would be their preference, and there's reasons probably why that would be better or worse depending on your perspective there. I do think that perhaps this is, like, if we want to get through these questions tonight, maybe that's a conversation that we note is like, we should do it, but maybe
Want
this
more
isn't.
information, yeah.
Because I just feel like we could do that all night.
Yeah.
Maren?
So 2 things real quickly. One is I've got to jump off this, and then and then I'll jump back on it with my phone. So just look for me in the waiting room in just a moment. The other thing is that I completely agree. That's a much bigger conversation. We'd love to have that. It's also that our school committee has state requirements as well. So it's not just we'd like to do it this way or we'd like to do it that way. We have requirements that we have to follow as well, and that state school reserves is part of that mandate. So we can't just go with our own preference to be able to, say, well, we're just going to have 0 reserves and come to the city if we need to, kind of thing. So there are requirements that we have to follow at the state level as a school committee and as a school department.
Right, and I think
so I just want to get into that.
I think better understanding those requirements is something that would be really helpful for us. But again, I think this could probably keep going for the next 5 hours if we let it. So.
And the state requests that we have about a 5% school reserve budget. So 5% of what is not even close to what we actually have. So the recommendation, we've maintained a much lower amount than what the state recommends us to have. And we have tried to manage that as best we can. And part of Dale's work over her tenure was to get us up to even a reasonable amount so we could manage the fluctuations in cash that have been required of our department. So just want to add that there. But look me in the waiting room. We'll be back in just a moment.
Okay. Cindy, I saw you had your hand up. You're muted.
Muted.
I forgot I muted myself. Maren kind of touched on it. Historically, we have tried to have that million for reserves because we need it quickly, and it's what is recommended as like a minimum safety. And if you look at the last few years, you can see that we pull that way down when we don't get the money that we need in terms of our budget. We do use that to fill in so that we can hold on to those level services that Megan was talking about that are so precious to the community. We can't just all of a sudden, it would be devastating to Easthampton to say, okay, well, we can't provide these services anymore, so we're going to do this, this, and this. So we have these very careful conversations about how much of the reserve is it safe for us to use, and is there a shot of building it back to a safety measure? Again, I'm a special ed teacher in another district, and I can tell you, I get new kids every single year. Surprise, here's a student, and that's great that we have a student, but what we didn't know is that student needs a para, student needs all these extra services. And again, you've got to be able to do that very quickly and just hire on the spot, fill that place. So it's not something that can be done in a slow process.
Understood. And I think we all, this is, right. The fact that you guys have to quickly make fiscal decisions and can't operate on a super lean budget is something that I think we all agree on. I mean, I still think that, there's probably conversations we could have about this stuff, but again, I think we would be here all day. But I think we can all agree that one way or another, however it's structured, the school department needs to be able to make relatively large financial decisions quickly and without doing anything that would compromise a student's privacy. I think we all 100% agree on that. Unless anyone does.
About it.
Yeah.
we're going to continue meeting, so we can designate a particular night to talk about this part,
Yes.
a particular night to do this. So I agree. Thank you.
I see Hadel's hand, and then I think we probably should move to question 6.
Just a quick technical question. From the city side, the reserve gets closed at the, so we have to make a reserve account available every fiscal year as a part of the budget. Does DESI has that kind of regulation? So our reserve is $200,000. We can't move money out of it until it goes to city council. If we don't use whatever is not used, that closes to general fund at the end of the fiscal year. Does DESI has that kind of regulation? No?
No.
We're advised to mirror DLR with the, is it your general fund, Hadel, that's
Yes,
supposed to
that's
have
DLR.
like 5% of your city total budget
Yeah,
or
but
something?
that,
Yeah, we're supposed,
that's like best practices.
yeah, DESI, that's best practice that we're supposed to mirror in a school district.
Yeah, so we do that, but at the end of the fiscal year, it expires. And then we
No,
do
I
the
see.
same thing again for the
It
new
rolls.
budget year. So that's what my question is. Does DESI has that regulation?
It doesn't.
No, it doesn't expire because it's sitting in a revolving fund.
Okay.
That's why. It's the school revolving funds are strictly governed by the Department of Revenue, and there's only certain revolving funds that can even exist.
Yeah.
I believe I sent you that chart back in the summer of the different types of revolving funds.
That was a foreign language for me. I need assistance.
Oh, it's all good. I will assist you in any way I can, but you would see the school choice revolving account on that chart.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's do question 6.
Okay, question
last
6,
one.
red. I see a sheet entitled FY23 budget options. I assume reductions if you don't receive additional funding. Is this correct? Please explain. So the sheet is referring to, it was kind of different budget scenarios that were, coming into play during the development of this year's budget. I'm not sure exactly when that sheet was created. Of course, I wasn't here yet, but
I can answer.
the options included on that sheet are 3 different % increases in non-fixed costs. You would see on that sheet that transportation and tuition in each of the 3 scenarios were not reduced because they can't be. I mean, that either due to Mass General Law or due to students' IEPs. I mean, those are fixed costs that you can't reduce. The different % increases listed were based on different scenarios of restoring positions that were originally proposed to be eliminated. Where we ended up, if we don't receive additional funding, we would either have to reduce positions during the school year, which would lead to layoffs, as well as the inability for us to properly provide services to our students, or the school choice account would have to be used to cover the shortfall. Which, as I mentioned earlier, this would lead to less school choice funding available, for needs mentioned in, past answers to questions this evening. This becomes particularly problematic as we inch closer to the end of the ESSER dollars, really. I mean, depending on how many positions we end up needing to keep and how much is able to actually be absorbed into the local budget, you may see school choice paying for a position or 2 that is currently ESSER funded. So, if we spend more than we anticipate out of there this year, that's going to put us in a bigger conundrum, if you will, when we get to the end of next year.
All right. That made sense to me. Anyone else have any questions?
I would just add that we developed that sheet to present to the school committee during the budget process. School committee approves our budget. So we offered them options, and the school committee felt very strongly that they did not want to reduce positions. They did not want to offer anything below a level service budget. So that was the choice the committee voted. But we wanted to show you
Okay.
the options.
So that's the context of,
Yes.
of that, those options in the
Yes.
sheet. That's kind of what I thought, but thanks for clarifying. Anything else on this point, or do we want to move? I mean, I've only got 3, and the first one we can just skip because we already answered it from Dan's.
All right, so Councilor Peak, your second question was in your budget factors letter, very helpful by the way, Massachusetts approved special education private school tuition rates should increase by 14% in FY24. Is there anything the district or the city could do to mitigate this? For example, would some sort of investment in programming or staff now result in a lower number of these students enrolling in private schools? Would that even be cost effective? So there's a few parts to this. So the 14% increase at this moment in time is technically, it's not approved yet, but rather it's an estimated rate of inflation for social services programs, which the OSD, the Operational Services Division arm of our state government, must provide to the Executive Office of Administration and Finance by October 1st each year to be used in preparation for the governor's annual budget recommendation. That being said, these estimated rates don't tend to change much when the actual numbers come out. So we're looking at about 14%. This tuition increase is for private out-of-district special education schools and would also apply to out-of-state approved special education schools. Those are 2 different lists, and we get both of them from the OSD. Not much can be done to mitigate this. Our schools, as Dr. LeClaire mentioned earlier, have several substantially separate programs for students whose needs are greater than can be met in the general education setting. And those programs keep many students in districts who would otherwise be placed in an out-of-district setting.
Go ahead, sorry.
That's okay. But there are a small number of students who do require more support that could be provided in our schools. We make every attempt to keep students in their home schools, which, not only is of course the morally right thing to do, but we're also required by law to provide students an education in what is referred to as a least restrictive environment. At times, it can be cost effective to hire a one-to-one paraeducator to support a student in one of our schools, and we certainly do have some of those on our staff. But the reality is that it all depends on the student and their own individual particular needs. Over the time that our special ed director, Sarah Mochak, has been in our district, we've created 6 specialized programs in order to keep students in their home schools, and including 2 new ones when Mountain View opened in September of this year. So, we are doing the types of things that your question was asking in terms of attempting to mitigate it as much as we can. But there are just some students whose needs are greater than what can be, done in our district.
Totally understood. Yeah, when I got the tour, I saw sort of the room that was set up. I thought that was really cool. I was just thinking of this because this was just an example from the city side where if there were something with those programs where we could say, hey, if we spend X dollars now, we're going to save more dollars.
Yeah, we always look at that.
Then that's something where I think that could potentially, I'm not the one who would ultimately make that call, but that would be very interesting to me, so yeah, but thanks for that. That was helpful.
Of course. Your third question stated, I have a good understanding of the timeline for the city's operating budget, or at least the city council side of it. But when it comes to the other money coming into the city, I don't really have a good sense of the dates or processes involved there. For example, with the circuit breaker and school choice funds, When does the district receive them? How are they calculated? And at what point does the district know what they will be? Also, this is a bit embarrassing because I know you've explained it before, but I'm still not entirely sure I understand circuit breaker. That's okay. I will totally understand and explain circuit breaker. I'm not sure why it's called that. When I think of a circuit breaker, I think of the service panel in my basement. But to answer your question, our circuit breaker, first of all, it's basically special ed reimbursement that's paid to us on a quarterly basis. School choice payments are made on a monthly basis. For grants, basically when a grant is approved, we get 10% right away. Remaining grant funds have to be requested each month during a specific time period, until they're used up. So basically, say I get a $10,000 grant. Once it's approved, the city will get the $1,000 right away, 10%. Then as I start spending on expenses that are going to be charged to the grant, each month it's called the drawdown period. And basically what you're doing is getting reimbursement for the expenses that you're spending that are going to be charged to the grant. Once the grant runs out, then of course you don't draw down any more funds and you close it. So, the different sources of revenue do come in at different times. So I hope that's helpful in answering that.
Okay, but a lot of it is occurring monthly. It's not like the circuit breaker randomly comes in November and that's just like there's this, because that's how like free cash is for the city, is there's just like a date where free cash gets certified. Until then we don't even know what it is, and then we actually receive.
Well, the circuit breaker, we don't exactly know what it is until it just came in this month. Yeah,
it came in like 2-3 days ago or something like that. It was very late this year, but I'll touch upon that when I answer the rest of your question here.
Okay, great.
So circuit breaker is a state special education reimbursement program that was created nearly 20 years ago to provide additional state funding to districts for high-cost special education students. The threshold for eligibility is tied to 4 times the state average foundation budget per pupil as calculated under the Chapter 70 program, with the state paying up to 75% of the costs that are above the threshold. Let me stop there because that may be confusing.
No, that'll make sense.
So there's a lot of calculation and work we have to do to get the reimbursement.
Director works tirelessly to fill out the circuit breaker claim form each year, but basically if per the state's Chapter 70 formula, if the average cost to educate a student in Massachusetts is $10,000, I'm just using that as a ballpark figure, it's more than that, but, and then we had a student that was in our district that it cost us $50,000 to educate, that student would meet the threshold. So basically we would be reimbursed up to 75% of anything that goes beyond 4 times the 10,000. So for the $10,000 that goes between the 40 and the 50,000, we could get up to 75% of that in reimbursement, or $7,500 for that student.
The following year.
But you're still on the hook for the first 40,000.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the first 40,000 we're on the hook for that. Yes.
Yeah.
I believe we claimed 28 students last year, and that's how many went into it. So anyway, there's a claim form that the district must submit to DESE by, I think it's early July. I typed in my notes June 30th, but I think it's like the end of the first week of July that Director Mochak has to submit. And it details all of the costs that meet that threshold. We can forecast it to the best of our ability. Like, Director Mochak knows who's going to be, first of all, kids that are placed in out-of-district settings. I know we talked about them a lot this evening, but they're all going to meet the threshold. But then there's students in district as well that may have a one-to-one paraeducator or just require an awful lot of related services. So she knows who those kids are. So we can kind of fill out our own little template form, if you will, during the budget development process to give ourselves the best idea. And of course we factor in the 75% reimbursement piece that goes with it. So we will have a decent idea of what we're going to get from Circuit Breaker. I would say that that's probably the hardest of our additional funding sources to calculate. Grants are grants. If you get one, you see the amount. It's kind of the school choices based on the slots you have. Circuit Breaker can be a bit of a moving target. But we certainly factor it in during the budget development process. DESE does not usually announce the actual reimbursement rates until October. They were late this year because last year was the first year we could claim transportation expenses. So it took them longer to do what they need to do on their end. But we finally got, I think it was last Friday, we finally got our number, which was good to have. The reimbursement that we get is for costs from the previous fiscal year. So all the Circuit Breaker revenue we get this year is for kids we claimed from last year. And then what we get each year must be expended by the end of the following fiscal year. So really you can carry over what you get for an additional year. So basically, what we get this year, we have to spend by the end of next year. And so forth. The cycle repeats itself.
And by next year, you mean fiscal year 2024?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. So, if we got $100,000 in Circuit Breaker this year, and then $100,000 in Circuit Breaker in FY24, at the end of FY24, we would have had to have spent that first $100,000 that came in this year.
Right.
As of last year, we were able, as I said, to claim transportation costs, and that came through the Student Opportunity Act, and which is good. It's going to increase the reimbursement that districts get. But our reimbursement funding is used to fund special education costs. It can only be used for that. We can't pay for a classroom teacher in a regular ed setting. Primarily we would fund out of district tuitions with it. But sometimes would pay for related services, like we contract out our physical therapy. It can be used for that, and transportation too. That's another thing it can pay for.
If I could just add, I don't want people on the call to jump to the conclusion, if we get a lot of Circuit Breaker money, maybe we could offset some of the district money. We could use that in different ways. We are required by state law, by the Department of Education, to maintain maintenance of effort in our special education district costs. So if we go below what we spent in the previous year in our special education department, we're red flagged by the Department of Education. So we have to continue to at least have the minimum that we had the previous year in our special education costs. We can't supplant with Circuit Breaker money.
Right. And also if you're spending...
There's a maintenance of effort law that there's rules we have to maintain.
Right. And I don't think anyone on the council is suggesting that we get stingy with the specialism.
Right.
I think, and the other thing about it is that frankly, if you're only getting 75% of what you spent, and that's only after the 4 times the foundation budget, then it's sort of like the stuff with the the chapter 70 or 90, whichever one it is, with the roads. It's like it's never going to actually cover all of it. There's no way you actually make a profit on it. It just cuts some of your losses.
Right.
Makes enough
Yeah,
sense.
that's not the purpose. Yeah, the purpose is not profit. Yeah, it's certainly it's reimbursement for what you've already spent.
Right. Okay, great.
I did have another part to answer your question about the school choice. Our school choice payment is based on the number of school choice slots that we have open, as we mentioned earlier, as well as on the needs of the students who fill them. I told you the base payment is $5,000 per student, but ones who require special services, the payment may be higher based on their needs. There's not, that many, but certainly some students, there's a special ed increment tied to their coming here. During the budget development process, we get a school choice revenue estimate from the preliminary cherry sheet that gets released by the state at the end of January. That's where we get our initial what we think we're going to get for school choice revenue. Does it ever end up being exactly that? No. When the final cherry sheet comes out, you'll have a slightly different figure. And then at the end of the year, when, we have to do a claim form each April for the kids that were choiced in, that's when the final tally will be in. And oftentimes DESE will then, send us more than they anticipated. Not much more, but, that's really when the final figure is in, which won't actually happen until next June. But the cherry sheet does give us a good base, because it's usually more conservative of an estimate than what's actually going to happen. So, we would base our revenue projection on that. And, that's where that $747,000 figure came from that I mentioned. Is right off the cherry sheet from last year, or from this year rather.
Great. All right, thanks. I think I understand that slightly better.
Great.
Could be a test.
I think Councilor Denham had a few questions too. And then I want to just throw this out there that after those questions, I know that there's a second thing on our agenda to have a discussion of free cash uses, but I've kind of been drinking from a fire hose this whole time, and I'm kind of wondering if we just want to call it after the questions. Like, I don't know if I'm ready to have like a big, high concept conversation about something else after this. This has been incredibly helpful, and I feel like I understand like 10 times as much stuff as I did coming in, but I am just wondering if maybe that's the thing we should do when we're fresh. Just a thought. Everyone good with that?
Good with that.
Cool.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so I'll move on to Councilor Denham's questions. So your first one, you were looking for a greater understanding of what was, basically what we were trying to accomplish with our school budget. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, and some of that had to do with, like I said before, it had to do with trying to understand the ESSER funds, et cetera. And so I didn't know how to kind of articulate that particular question in terms of, because I know there was just a large conversation about spending down this money, et cetera. And so just trying to understand what you were trying to accomplish. But in kind of the explanation of what you were describing, and then my follow-up question to try to understand that kind of informed that particular question. So
okay, so that was focusing on specifically ESSER funds and not the budget as a whole. Okay. Mm-hmm. I interpreted it as our larger budget as a whole. Mm-hmm. But if you were thinking about the ESSER funds, I think we've probably answered that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I can move on to number 2 then. You also wanted to know more about when the different funds come into the budget. Our local appropriation gets to us after the city council votes the budget, and then the new fiscal year begins, and, I'm not really sure what happens on the auditor side, but eventually we're told we can put our budget into our accounting software and we're good to go. The other funding sources, as I mentioned when I answered Councilor Peak's question, do come in different times. And, we can anticipate them. As I said, the school choice will come in once a month. Another funding source I didn't mention, it's not really going to impact this, but our food service reimbursements for meals, that'll come in once a month as well. You don't see it as part of our local budget at all, but, it's in our food service revolving account, and it pays for our Chartwells, who we contract with. That's the vendor that does our school meal. So every month we submit a claim form to the USDA, and they'll process that, and we'll get reimbursements for that too. So do you feel that you have a better understanding now of when the different funds come in?
Yeah, I think the last kind of two questions that Councilor Peak also asked were kind of informed that, so that was very helpful.
Okay. All right, so then I'll move on to your Hadel's question.
Hadel.
Yeah. So just to tell you the second city side of what Nick was mentioning, what happens on the school side. He mentioned city side. I get the grant paperwork. I set up in the account. Set up the new account. When money comes in, it goes into that from treasurer's office. And when the school department decides to spend it on their warrant, it hits the warrant side, and that's the full picture. So school side, Nick explained. City side, I just explained.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
All right, so your third question was stated that it would be helpful to you to understand the approach to filling our budget gaps, and you asked why the gaps can't be filled towards the end of the fiscal cycle rather than now.
Mm-hmm. So, and some of that you also answered, right? So it made sense.
I think there's a little I'd like to add, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we feel that it's very important to fill the gaps as early as possible. And some of it really just has to do with procurement law. We can't encumber money for purchases unless there's an actual appropriation there. So, for example, if we're short $300,000, I can't create a purchase order to pay a bill that would have been funded with any of that $300,000. Because many of our expenses are the result of contracts, an appropriation must be there to fund them, or else the contract essentially is illegal. Most of the remainder of our expenses is in salaries, as you know, it's over 70%. The thing that makes the school budget, I think, unique in terms of the remainder of the city budgets is I think that we know far more of our expenses and needs at the beginning. I think other departments probably end up with more unanticipated costs than we do. Like we have a picture of what our expenses are going to be right at the beginning. And we're not looking for any sort of appropriation to cover potential unanticipated costs here. I mean, that's what our school choice is for, as we mentioned. We're looking to cover the costs that we already know we have. We're in the process right now of forecasting, just how large of a gap that will be, now that we're into quarter 2 of the fiscal year. Is it that full 561,000 or is it less? But we certainly do not intend to ask for anything larger than we need to cover our costs. A lot of departments, I think, might come to the city council at the end of a fiscal cycle to ask for an appropriation because maybe their overtime budget was way beyond what they expected, which is going to happen with fire and police and other departments depending on what happens. Our budget doesn't work that way. I mean, we do budget for overtime, but we're strict with it in terms of this is what we have, and we really don't allow people to work beyond that, but we can get away with it. We're not an emergency response service. You know what I mean? Other departments function differently. So our costs are far more known going in. So we base our budget on that and not on a bunch of unanticipated things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it does sound like you have a few big unanticipated things that happen, but yeah, it's certainly, like over time, you've probably got it. It's a different situation.
Right.
Okay, great.
Is that enough?
Was that all of your questions, Councilor Denham?
Yeah, like I said, some of it was answered through your questions,
okay.
And so it helped me to kind of understand those pieces, as well as kind of the circuit breaker and the revolving, right? Like trying to understand when do those budgets come into play and to kind of cover what when.
Right. Well, I just want to thank everyone involved because I really do feel like just over the course of this conversation, there were things that were said that made me flash back to the budget season and to things that were being said there, times where people were, maybe things got a little intense, and there were just things that weren't clicking, where we didn't necessarily, like, there was just some stuff I didn't, like, not say we all agree on everything now, but I think like I do understand better now sort of the mindset that and sort of the sort of the business climate that you're operating in. So I really do think it's going to probably take me a couple of days to fully process everything, and I might have some follow-up questions,
Sure.
but I can't speak for my colleagues, but I personally feel like I know a lot more, and if nothing else comes of this, then come budget season, I feel like I'm going to be better prepared to understand and be a meaningful participant in those conversations.
That's all we hope for.
Great. All right, so if there's nothing else, then on the council side, I would entertain a motion to adjourn unless anybody has anything else they want to bring up.
So moved.
I just want to add one little comment here if I can. I really appreciate your comments there, Thomas, and I just really appreciate this opportunity for us to be able to come together. I think it's really helpful, especially when we're outside of the pressure of budget season, to be able to help make sure that everyone does understand. I think that the school budget, this is going to be the 6th year of school budget that I've been involved with, and it is complex. There is a lot of known things, a lot of unknown things that we're budgeting. There are a lot of different revenue sources and different factors that go into that, and we're all trying to do our best. I forget who said that this is not about creating profit. We're not in the business to create profit. We are managing a lot of different pieces and trying to do the best we can for our students. So I'm glad that we're able to come together and provide more information for you all out of that pressure time of budget season.
Great.
Thank you.
Unless there's anything else, I will second my Councilor Denham's motion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right.
They need to adjourn.
And then I also need to make a motion to end the meeting for school committee, finance subcommittee. Can I have a second?
I second it.
And can we all vote to end the meeting? Aye.
Aye.
She said aye.
Okay, she-
I got it.
Muted, I meant I.
All right. Well, this joint meeting is thus adjourned.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.